The first one hit Sao Paulo at 6:14 in the morning. No warning, no signal, no time to react. A figure tore through the atmosphere at a speed that cracked the air open behind him, and then there was fire where a 6-lane highway used to be. The variant struck the ground and kept going. Concrete split beneath him. Cars flattened like aluminum foil. People ran in directions that led nowhere. São Paulo was first. By 6:16, 2 more portals opened, one over Lagos, one above a bridge outside Tokyo. The bridge went down in 3 pieces. The variant on the other side walked through the wreckage and started hitting things. Anything. Everything. There was no strategy to it. There did not need to be. 18 portals. 18 versions of the same man. 18 simultaneous strikes across 6 continents, each one landing on a different piece of critical infrastructure. Power stations, rail networks, military command centers, satellite uplink towers. Moscow lost its eastern grid within the first 20 minutes. A variant in Sydney drove through the roof of a naval communications hub and reduced it to rubble before any alarm had finished sounding. The attacks were precise in their targets and savage in their execution. Within 40 minutes, 14 countries had declared national emergencies. Within an hour, 3 of them had stopped responding to international channels entirely. 3 miles below the Nevada desert, Angstrom Levy watched every feed at once. He did not look like someone who should still be functional. The mutation had hollowed him out. The hair was gone, the veins along his neck and temples swollen dark and visible beneath thinning skin. Equipment hummed against his spine, keeping his nervous system from collapsing under the weight of what his brain could now perceive. A dark cloak covered the apparatus. Not vanity, practicality. People tended to react poorly when they saw what the human body looked like after being rebuilt from the inside out. But the feeds were clean. 18 portals holding steady, each one pouring devastation into a world that had never been designed to absorb it. Angstrom had calibrated everyone personally. Every coordinate, every drop point, every variant selected for maximum disruption. This was his war. His proof. Mark Grayson, every copy of him, was the flaw in the system. Angstrom was going to make sure the entire planet watched it tear itself apart. He pushed the portals harder. The overclock was instinctive, a tightening of the dimensional channels, forcing more throughput, more chaos per second. Portals flickered. Some of them stuttered their edges, distorting like heat shimmer over cracked asphalt. 2 feeds cut out entirely. Angstrom frowned and pushed harder still. Something behind his eyes went tight, a pressure that built and did not release. He ignored it. The screen stabilized. The rifts held, but they were not holding the way they had before. Coordinates began to stack. Portals that had been isolated, each one occupying its own clean pocket of dimensional space, started overlapping. Not in location, in depth. The rifts were boring deeper than anything Angstrom had mapped, deeper than any version of the multiverse on his charts. Equipment registered the shift as a low vibration, almost subsonic, like something very large and very far away had just noticed the noise. 5 more screens went dark in the span of 8 seconds. Angstrom reached for the controls, a physical instinct, his hands moving to adjust channels that were no longer responding to adjustment. The dimensional architecture behind the rifts had shifted, not drifted. Shifted. The channels he had built, each one a precise corridor between 2 points in the multiverse, were no longer corridors. They were cracks. Uncontrolled fractures running in directions his instruments could not map. He pulled back on 3 of them. The rifts did not close. They held their shape open and static, as though the act of overclocking had burned them permanently into place. Angstrom stared at the readings. The numbers meant nothing. They were registering dimensions that did not exist on any chart he had ever seen, coordinates that resolved to empty space or to spaces that should not have been empty. Something had found the cracks. He did not know what it was yet. The instruments could not tell him. All they could report was the shape of the gap, and the gap was getting wider. Angstrom was watching Sao Paulo burn. He missed it entirely. The tear opened at 8:47 a.m. over the Pacific coast. Not like a portal. Not like anything that had a name yet. One moment there was ocean gray, flat, unremarkable water stretching to the horizon. The next a wound appeared in the sky, not light, not dark. A place where the fabric of what existed stopped, and something on the other side of that stop pressed against the edge. No one saw it happen. No satellite captured it. The 3 nearest uplink towers had already gone offline, collateral damage from a variant strike 2 hours prior. The coast was a dead zone. No signals in, no signals out. The wound sat there open and patient and waited. It did not have to wait long. One of the Mark variants was being chased near the shoreline. A GDA strike team had intercepted its 7 soldiers with weapons that could not stop it buying time for an evacuation already 40 minutes too late. The variant threw one of them through a building and turned back toward the surf. The strike team followed. The variant hit the ocean at full speed and the water split around him like it was afraid. He surfaced 40 yards out, chest deep, still moving. Behind him, the wound in the sky pulsed once. Something moved within it, not light, not shadow, but a density. A presence that belonged to no dimension the variant had ever crossed through. A thread of living darkness wound itself through the variant's chest, beneath the suit, beneath the skin. Nothing cut. Nothing burned. It settled in like a root, finding water, and held. The variant stood in the surf and stopped moving. Not stunned, not dead. Still breathing, still standing. Just no longer in control of any of it. Mark Grayson was in Oregon when the call came through. Cecil's voice on the line flat and clipped. 18, all at once. Move. That was the entire transmission. Mark was airborne before the channel closed. Lagos first, because Lagos was closest and Lagos was the worst. A variant had taken an entire city block apart, not strategically, not surgically, but the way a child pulls the legs off an insect. Mark arrived at speed and drove his fist into the variant's jaw mid-stride. The impact cracked the street beneath both of them. The variant's head snapped back. It kept swinging. They fought for 90 seconds. Mark took a hit that caved in part of his ribs. He answered with 2 strikes to the sternum that would have killed anything human. The variant staggered, bled, and did not go down fast enough. Mark grabbed it by the throat, slammed it into the ground 3 times, and felt something in its neck give way on the 3rd impact. 90 seconds, 1 down, 17 still active. Mark wiped blood off his face and flew toward the next signal. Jakarta was the 2nd. This variant had already leveled a port district by the time Mark arrived. Container ships overturned in the harbor like toys. Mark hit it at full speed, and then they both punched through a warehouse and out the other side into open street. 3 blocks of fighting, 2 more cracked ribs on Mark's side. The variant went down harder this time. Mark put it face first into the ground and did not let go until it stopped twitching. 15 seconds. 15 seconds in a port district that no one was going to rebuild for years. None of what was happening on the coast reached him. The portals stacking wrong, the tear that had opened over dead water, the thing that had latched onto a variant, now standing motionless in the surf. None of it was on any channel Cecil had access to yet. Even if it had been, the information would not have changed what Mark did in the next 6 hours. Fly from one point of destruction to the next. Put down variants. Bleed between landings. By 2 o'clock, 3 coastal monitoring stations had gone dark, each one in a different region. each one with no apparent cause. A GDA analyst flagged the pattern at 2:14 and sent it to Cecil's desk. The report was 3 sentences long. Cecil read it, set it down, and did not look at it again for 40 minutes. By the time he did, the number had risen to 7. Each dead zone sat along a coastline. Each one was perfectly silent. And in the satellite imagery that still worked, the water in every single one of them had turned the same color, a black so deep it did not look like water at all. Whatever was growing down there, it was not finished. The dead zones were spreading. Cecil had the count at 6 o'clock a.m. 11. Coastal segments, each one, a clean silence on every band. GDA monitored. No radio, no satellite return, no thermal signature. The analysts filed it as signal degradation. Cecil knew better. He watched 2 more segments go dark on the board, while the coffee in his hand went cold. 3 calls in 4 minutes. Logistics first. Then the reanimin unit commander. Then a message to Mark that would arrive 3 minutes after Mark had already changed direction on his own. Forget the copies. I need eyes on Sector 7, now. Reanimin deployment was not Cecil's first choice. It was his fastest one. 18 units dropped into the dead zone at Sector 7 in a single coordinated strike. Each one was a former human body rebuilt from the inside out. The organic tissue was still there, preserved beneath layers of military-grade cybernetic grafting. Titanium endoskeleton. Synthetic muscle fiber laced over what remained of the original frame. Reinforced joints. Sensor arrays grafted behind the eyes. The bodies moved with mechanical precision, but they were not machines. Not entirely. There was still flesh underneath. Still bone. Still enough of what had once been a person to make the technicians who maintained them avoid eye contact during service. Cecil had authorized the program 2 years prior for exactly this kind of scenario situations, where conventional forces were insufficient and acceptable losses had already been exceeded. Reanimin did not need to survive. They needed to fight, collect data, and transmit everything back to GDA command before they stopped functioning. Cecil had signed the authorization himself. First contact was fast and ugly. One of the 18 duplicates was dismantling a coastal freight depot when the reanimin arrived. 7 units hit it simultaneously, no preamble, no warning. Titanium fists drove into its chest. Synthetic arms locked its joints. The duplicate fought back the same way it had fought everywhere else, raw force, zero hesitation, pure destruction with no purpose behind it. 3 reanimin came apart in the first exchange. Limbs sheared off at the joint. One torso collapsed inward, plating folding like paper. But the remaining units adjusted, pressed closer, and the duplicate outmatched 4-1 began to give. A reanimin drove its reinforced fist into the duplicate's sternum and held until something cracked. The duplicate dropped to the ground and stayed there. Data transmission took 11 seconds. GDA. Command received everything. Force distribution, structural damage analysis, time to neutralize. Cecil read the report and flagged it for the next phase. Phase 2 began at 9:33 a.m. Remaining reanimin units pushed deeper into Sector 7. The dead zone had expanded again overnight. Another 2 miles of coastline swallowed into silence. No birds. No wind that carried sound the way wind was supposed to. The air sat heavy and still dense in a way that had nothing to do with humidity, and the reanimin moved across it in formation. Contact with the black substance came without warning. A unit stepped across a section of shoreline, where the ground had changed color, dark, wet, spreading outward in slow pulses. Its sensors registered the anomaly and flagged it. Before the flag reached command, the substance moved. Not like liquid. Not like anything cataloged. It climbed the unit's leg in a single motion, found the seam between the cybernetic plating and the organic tissue underneath, and pushed into it. The frame's internal reading spiked. Temperature at the contact point climbed 40 degrees in 2 seconds, then dropped below baseline and kept dropping. Motor function in the left leg registered full output, while the right leg stopped registering anything at all. The black material moved up the chassis in layers, each one pulling different systems offline in sequence. Not random, not chaotic. It was reading the architecture of the frame as it went, and it was choosing what to take first. Sensor array went dark at 9:41:03. Communication relay followed at 9:41:05. The unit's position markers stayed active, the one system the black had not yet reached and held its coordinates without moving. Transmission cut out. 0.4 seconds of silence. When the unit came back online, the data stream was corrupted, garbled. Then it went quiet entirely. Cecil was watching the feed when it dropped. He pulled up the tactical display without flinching and watched the unit's position marker hold steady, not moving, not dark, just still. Present, online by some measure, but not responding to any command signal. "Pull the unit back," he told the operations officer. The officer tried. The unit did not move. Cecil looked at the marker for 6 seconds. Then he looked at the other 14 units, still active in Sector 7. "Pull them all back, now." 2 of the 14 responded. They turned and began moving towards extraction. 12 stayed where they were. Cecil watched the display. 12 position markers holding steady in a loose arc across the dead zone. 12 units that had been under GDA command 30 seconds ago and were not anymore. No raised voice, no slammed consoles. He picked up the phone and called Mark. Mark was already in the air over the Pacific when the call connected. Cecil's voice flat. "Sector 7, something has gone wrong with the reanimin. I need you on the ground." Mark did not ask what had gone wrong. He changed course. He hit the coastline at 10:15 a.m. and knew immediately that this was not the same kind of fight he had been running all morning. The duplicates were bad, brutal, relentless, mindless. This was different. The air was wrong. The ground beneath his feet felt dense in a way that concrete never did. And standing at the border of the dead zone, motionless in a loose formation, were 12 reanimin units that should have been under remote command, but were facing him as though they had made a decision. One of them moved first, fast. And wrong, not the mechanical precision Cecil had programmed into the frame, but something deliberate. Something that was reading Mark and adjusting. Faster than the cybernetic frame should have allowed. It closed the distance in 2 strides and swung a titanium fist at Mark's head. Mark ducked, drove his shoulder into its midsection, and pushed it backward. The unit did not stumble. It adjusted mid-motion and brought both arms around in a crushing arc. Mark took the hit across the ribs, felt something crack. He answered with a strike to the unit's chest that caved in the plating and sent it skidding across the ground. It got back up. The others moved in. Mark fought for 40 seconds before something else entered the fight. Something that was not a reanimin and not a duplicate. A shape in the black, larger than anything he had seen on the ground so far, moving with a fluid speed that had no business existing in a body that size. It hit him from the side at a speed that left no room to brace. The impact carried him across a building, 2 walls, and into open air on the other side. Mark struck the ground on the far side, felt his ribs scream, and rolled to his feet, in time to see it already turning back toward him. It was there, and then it was gone, absorbed back into the black at the border of the dead zone. Mark stood in the rubble, bleeding from a gash along his jaw, and waited. Nothing else came. Back at GDA command. Cecil was reading the sensor data from Sector 7. 12 reanimin units had stopped moving again. They stood in formation at the perimeter of the expanded dead zone facing outward. facing the rest of the world. Not attacking, not retreating. Just standing there, and Cecil could not determine whether that was worse than anything else on the board. He pulled up the biological data from the units that had transmitted before going silent. The symbiote material had bonded to the organic tissue, first the preserved flesh, the bone, the remnants of what these bodies had been before GDA rebuilt them. Cybernetic components came second. Not destroyed. Repurposed. Cecil set the report aside and picked up the phone again. This time, he did not call Mark. "Get me a containment assessment on Sector 7, he said. "And flag every piece of hardware in the deployment roster that has organic tissue in the frame." He hung up and looked at the board. 11 dead zones had become 13. 12 reanimen are still standing at the perimeter of the largest one, perfectly still, perfectly silent. "This isn't an attack," Cecil said to no one in the room. "It's a condition. Things just went from bad to worse. We all know the reanimen are tough, but seeing them get hijacked like a computer virus is a whole new level of scary. Honestly, the way that Black Goo reads the tech and chooses what to take first is super unsettling. I really don't think there is even a way to fight something that learns your moves while you are making them." Let me know in the comments if you would trust Cecil's decisions after this, and let's see if Mark can do any better in the next part. The body was still standing when the GDA team arrived. It had been standing for 11 hours. No movement. No response to radio to gunfire, to the proximity grenades the team lead had thrown at its feet out of frustration rather than strategy. The body, one of the duplicates, one of the 18, stood at the center of a collapsed intersection in what used to be a suburb outside of Portland. Its eyes were open. Its chest moved in and out with the rhythm of breathing. It did not look at anything. The team lead ordered 3 shots to the chest. The duplicate did not flinch. The bullets passed into tissue that should have been Viltrumite dense and kept going. The wounds closed in under 2 seconds, not healing, not sealing, just filling back in like clay, being pushed together by an invisible hand. The team lead stopped shooting and pulled back. He filed the report at 1:47 p.m. Cecil read it 40 minutes later and did not forward it to anyone. Angstrom Levy had lost track of the war. That was not something he would have admitted even to himself. But the feeds had changed. The duplicates he had deployed were no longer following the pattern he had set at infrastructure, maximize disruption, force a global response. Some of them had stopped hitting anything at all. They stood in clusters at the edges of the expanding infected territory, facing outward waiting. Others had moved deeper into zones where no signals reached GDA anymore. Angstrom could not see what they were doing in there. His rifts could not penetrate the occupied stretch. He pushed harder, opened 2 more dimensional tears over the Midwest. 4 more duplicates dropped in. They hit their targets, a power grid in Iowa, a military installation outside of Omaha, and then within the hour, 2 of them stopped responding. Angstrom watched their position markers drift toward the nearest infected territory and hold there. Angstrom was losing his own pieces. Cecil's message reached Mark over Kansas. Short, no context, a set of coordinates, and 1 line, "This one isn't fighting. Go see for yourself." Mark landed in a field outside of a town that no longer had power. The streets were empty. No cars moving. No people visible. He found the duplicate 3 blocks in standing at the center of an intersection, perfectly still. The same posture the GDA team in Portland had reported. The same open eyes, the same breathing, the same total absence of aggression. The first strike was full force, a punch to the jaw, the kind that had put duplicates on the pavement permanently in Lagos and Jakarta in every fight he had run in the last 18 hours. The duplicate's head snapped back. Its body absorbed the impact the way concrete absorbs rain. Then it straightened, looked at nothing, and went back to standing still. He hit it again, harder. The duplicate's jaw cracked. It stayed upright. It did not swing back. It breathed, and it stood, and it did nothing else. Pulling back, Mark looked at it for a long time. The duplicate did not look back. Behind it, the town was completely still. No sirens, no movement, no sound at all. The duplicate breathed at the center of it. Still running, still on. Nothing else. Across the country, in a different kind of silence, a Team Hero unit had engaged, what the after-action report would later call a Mark Black. The designation was not official. It was what the surviving members started using after the fight, because there was no other word for what they had encountered a duplicate like the others, except darker. Covered in a layer of black that moved on its own, that swallowed light the way a drain takes water. The same build, the same face, something else underneath. The team had 6 members, trained, armed, coordinated. They engaged the Mark Black in a warehouse district outside of Denver, and the fight lasted 9 seconds. The first strike came before anyone finished their approach vector. The Mark Black moved at a speed that did not match the body it occupied, faster than Viltrumite biology should have allowed, faster than anything the team had trained against. It hit the first soldier hard enough to send him across a concrete wall. The second tried to flank. The Mark Black turned and drove its fist into the soldier's sternum. The impact lifted him off the pavement and carried him 30 feet before he landed. 9 seconds. 6 soldiers. 3 of them were still alive when it was over, and none of them could describe what they had seen clearly enough to put in a report that made sense. The Mark Black did not pursue them. It stopped in the center of the warehouse district, surrounded by wreckage, and stood still. Same posture, same breathing, same empty regard for everything around it. Mark arrived 40 minutes later, following the distress signal from the surviving soldiers. He saw the Mark Black immediately standing in the open, in the middle of the destruction it had created, not reacting to his arrival. Mark closed the distance fast. 20 yards, 10, 5. He drove his fist into the Mark Black's chest at full force. The impact cracked the street beneath both of them. The Mark Black moved backward not from pain, but from physics. It slid across the surface, stopped, and turned back to face Mark. The black layer on its body rippled once adjusted, and went still. Mark struck again. A combination jaw-rib sternum. Each hit landed clean. Each hit did damage that should have been permanent. The Mark Black absorbed all of it and kept standing. Mark drove his elbow into its temple. Bone compressed. The black layer over the skull cracked, peeled back for an instant, and closed again. Faster than the jaw had. He grabbed the arm and twisted. The joint gave way. With a sound that should have ended the fight, the arm hung wrong for 2 full seconds. Then the Black pulled it back into alignment, rebuilt the joint, and the arm moved again, as though nothing had happened. Mark threw everything he had into the sternum. The impact drove the Mark Black backward 3 yards. A crater opened in the asphalt where it braced. The Black absorbed the force, redistributed it, and the frame straightened without effort. On the third exchange, it moved not to defend, not to counterattack, but to close distance. It stepped into Mark's guard and placed one hand flat against his chest. The contact lasted less than a second. A pressure registered against Mark's ribs, not pain exactly, but a reading. As though the Mark Black had checked a value and found the answer it needed. Then it stepped back, turned, and walked into the nearest stretch of the dark without looking back. Mark did not follow. He stood there for several seconds, watching the dark swallow the Mark Black entirely, before turning back toward the wreckage behind him. Back at GDA operations, Cecil was looking at a map that no longer meant what maps were supposed to mean. 31 infected stretches. 11 confirmed duplicate positions that had stopped engaging. 4 communication blackouts with no technical explanation. And 1 report from Denver that described a Mark Black making contact with a target, reading something off of it, and then retreating into occupied territory without further action. Cecil looked at the map for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called the operations coordinator. "Mark off sectors 12 through 19, he said. "No intervention, no reconnaissance. Nothing goes in." He hung up. 31 infected stretches became 31 permanent boundaries on the board. The world outside those lines kept moving. The world inside them had stopped. A star went quiet at 3:12 a.m. UTC. No flare, no collapse, no recorded event of any kind. One moment it registered on every deep space array. GDA had access to a steady, unremarkable point of light 11 light-years out. Next, the arrays returned nothing. Not darkness, not absence. A gap where data used to exist and no instrument that could explain why. GDA's on-duty analyst flagged it as equipment failure. She ran 3 diagnostics. All 3 returned clean. She flagged it again and sent the report upstairs. Cecil read it at 6 a.m. He read it twice, set it aside, and called the one number he had been told never to use unless the situation qualified as existential. It took 40 minutes for anyone on the other end to answer. Sector 14 went live at 0600 hours. Cecil had ordered the bait zone built 2 days prior, not from a warehouse, not from requisition stores, but from what was available on active battlefields. Salvaged corpses pulled from the variant engagements in Lagos and Jakarta. Equipment stripped from fallen hero units. DNA samples, each one cataloged by origin and biological profile. Anything organic, anything that had once been alive and could serve as raw material for a hive that needed templates. Sector 14 was a 6-block radius of coastal territory GDA had already written off. No evacuation possible. The civilian population had either fled or vanished into infected stretches days before. Cecil posted no personnel inside the perimeter. He posted sensors. Dozens of them at every entry point, every rooftop, every piece of infrastructure still standing. Salvaged material arranged in the center, in the open, visible from every angle. Then he waited. First sensor trigger 0743. Movement registered inside the zone, not across open ground, but through the gaps. Through cracks in foundation walls, through drainage systems beneath the streets. Through shadow cast by a collapsed parking structure at 7:44 a.m., when full daylight made that kind of transit impossible by any known physics. Cecil pulled up the drainage sensor grid first. Black material appeared in the conduit network at 0751, not flowing, not pooling, moving with direction. It followed the pipe layout for 40 meters, found a junction where 2 systems met and dispersed upward into the foundation. The sensor at the junction recorded contact for 0.3 seconds. Then the readings went flat. The material was gone, not destroyed, not blocked. It had moved into the structure itself, into the concrete, into the gap between poured sections where no instrument could follow. The shadow transit came next. A collapsed parking structure at the edge of the perimeter cast a band of darkness across the street at 0758. Daylight on both sides. The band was narrow, 3 feet wide at most. A sensor mounted on the adjacent wall detected a density change within the shadow for 1.1 seconds. When the shadow shifted, as the sun moved, the density was gone. On the other side of the street, a sensor recorded the black material arriving at 0758.4. No physical path connected the 2 points. The material had not moved across the ground or beneath it. It had moved along the shadow, and when the shadow ended, it was already somewhere else. Cecil watched the pattern on the tactical display. Movement did not follow corridors or pathways. It followed negative space anywhere light did not reach. Anywhere a wall met a floor. Anywhere the structure of the zone created a seam. Force fields. Cecil had deployed at 3 entry points, registered no contact. The black did not push against them. It moved around them, through gaps in their own architecture, and appeared on the other side as though the barriers had never existed. Walls slowed nothing. Doors registered no force. The hive moved through the zone the way water moves through soil, finding every weakness without searching for any of them. Cecil watched the feeds. Salvaged material began to disappear. Not taken, not moved, absorbed. Piece by piece, the corpses and equipment sank into the black pooling beneath them, drawn under at a steady rate as though something below were pulling thread through fabric. Sensors recorded everything: force readings, temperature shifts, electromagnetic interference that followed no pattern his analysts could model. By 900, the bait zone was empty. Sensors still transmitting. Black remained a permanent stain where the material had been still and silent. He flagged the data and forwarded it to 2 addresses. One was internal. The other was not on any network GDA had built. Mark was still on the ground when Cecil's order came through. "Get to orbit," Cecil said. "There's a coalition vessel approaching. You're going to meet it." Mark had been in Sector 9 clearing debris from a leveled residential block. No duplicates, no threat. Just wreckage and silence that meant no one was left to evacuate. He looked up at the sky, clear blue ordinary, and did not argue. A shuttle launched from a military airstrip outside of Jacksonville at 11:15 a.m. Mark sat in the back, not suited, not briefed. Pilot did not speak. The ascent took 4 minutes. Atmosphere thinned. The viewport filled with blue, then darker blue, then black. At 60,000 feet, the curvature of the surface became visible the way the horizon bent away in every direction. He did not look at the curvature. He looked at what was on the surface. The infected stretches were visible before the shuttle cleared the atmosphere. Not as color, as absence. Lines where coastline and river systems had gone dark, where the grid of cities and roads simply ended. From this altitude, they looked deliberate lines drawn on a map by someone who knew exactly where they wanted the borders. Cecil's voice came through the comm once flat. "Do not engage anything. Do not leave the vessel. Watch and report." Mark watched. Coalition vessel was already in high orbit when the shuttle docked. Gray, angular, functional, built for operations that prioritized efficiency over visibility. Mark stepped onto the observation deck and registered 3 things in sequence. Earth below first. Infected stretches visible from orbit, dark patches along coastlines and river systems, spreading outward in patterns that had no resemblance to damage deliberate methodical, as though being mapped onto a surface. Second, a holographic display at the center of the deck, Sol system in miniature. Every planet, every tracked object. And beside the designation for Earth, a single marker in red. Text beneath it read, "Quarantine pending." Third, the coalition representative, positioned near the display with her hands clasped behind her back, watching Mark the way a quarantine officer watches a patient who has just walked into the examination room. She did not introduce herself. She did not offer information. She waited until Mark had finished looking at the display, and then she spoke. "We have seen this before." Mark looked at her. He did not ask where or when. The answer was in the way she said it, not as a warning, not as comfort, but as a fact being entered into a record. Back on Earth, Cecil was on a secured channel with the same coalition command structure that had placed the quarantine marker beside Sol. Short conversation. Cecil asked 1 question and received 1 answer. Question: "How long before you make a final determination?" Answer: 72 hours from first contact with the anomaly. Your signal reached us 31 hours ago. Cecil ended the call. Looked at the board. Infected stretches had expanded again overnight. Sectors 12 through 19 still locked. Bait zone in Sector 14 consumed nothing left behind, but a stain on the ground. and a data set that would take weeks to interpret fully. 41 hours remaining on the coalition clock. Cecil calculated it without moving, without reaching for anything. Somewhere above the atmosphere, a red marker sat beside the name of his planet, and the decision about whether it stayed there was no longer his to make. On the observation deck of the coalition vessel, Mark stood at the viewport and watched the dark patches spread across the surface below. The representative had left. The display still showed the red marker beside Saul. Somewhere down there, Cecil was making decisions that no longer required Mark's input. Somewhere below, the atmosphere duplicates held position at the edges of territory that had already been given up. And somewhere beyond the viewport, in directions Mark could not see, other systems were being watched by the same people who had placed that marker, waiting to see if what was happening on Earth would stay on Earth. Mark did not move from the viewport for a long time. There was nothing else to do. That escalated just so quickly. 1 minute we are dealing with evil versions of Mark, and now the stars are literally disappearing. When the coalition shows up and says, "Quarantine pending," we know Earth is in big trouble. It feels like the planet is just a petri dish the rest of the galaxy is ready to throw away. It is wild how Cecil is the only one keeping a cool head while the whole universe is basically ghosting us. I couldn't even imagine what we should do if we saw a giant red quarantine sign next to our planet. 7 ships arrived in formation at 0200 hours Sol relative, each one larger than anything GDA had ever tracked in Earth orbit. Coalition heavy cruisers, flat, wide-hulled vessels, built for area denial, not engagement. They took positions at equatorial orbit without broadcasting, without signaling, without any of the protocols Earth-based systems expected. Then all at once, they began transmitting on every frequency GDA monitored. A single repeating message in standardized galactic protocol Sol system under quarantine review. All unauthorized traffic cease immediately. Cecil received it at the same time everyone else did. He read it, set it aside, and waited. There was nothing to respond to. This was not a negotiation. On the observation deck of the lead vessel, Mark watched the formation lock into place. 7 ships in a clean arc above Earth's atmosphere. Sensor arrays deployed outward scanning in overlapping patterns. He had been given quarters on the flagship 2 days prior, a small compartment functional, no windows. He had spent most of the time on the observation deck, instead watching the planet below change. Infected stretches had doubled overnight. Dark bands across 3 continents visible from orbit without magnification. No longer spreading in the way infection spreads opportunistic, chaotic following weakness. Now it was being drawn. Precise lines extending from each previous boundary, following no geographic logic. Roads, rivers, fault lines, none of it mattered. The black moved where it needed to go, and the terrain adjusted around it. Coalition Tactical Command issued the first order at 0347. Sterilize perimeter. Full spectrum energy dispersal at orbital insertion points. Target all anomalous biological signatures within the contamination zone. Clinical language. It avoided the word burn. It used sterilize and dispersal and neutralization instead. The distinction mattered only to the people giving the order. All 7 ships opened fire simultaneously. Beams were visible from the observation deck. Thin columns of concentrated energy, white-blue dropping from orbit to the surface in parallel lines. Each one aimed at the outer edge of an infected stretch. Each one calibrated to destroy organic material across a 600-meter radius. Mark counted the columns as they fired. 7 beams, 7 targets. Clean geometry. First beam should have hit. Mark watched the readout on the tactical screen as the beam crossed the atmosphere, entered the contamination zone, and continued downward. Energy signature held steady for 0.3 seconds. Then it dropped. Not absorbed, not deflected. The readouts showed the beams still transmitting, still drawing power from the cruiser above. But the energy was no longer arriving at its target. It had gone into the contamination zone and vanished. No impact registered. No dispersal. As though the beam had been swallowed by a space that refused to let it land. Second beam followed an identical pattern, third as well. Coalition tactical staff ran diagnostics on all 7 weapons platforms. Every system returned clean. Power output nominal. Targeting geometry confirmed accurate. The beams were firing correctly. They were simply ceasing to exist upon contact with the contamination zone. No mechanism for this was available in any coalition weapons database. The energy did not scatter. It did not reflect. It entered the zone and produced no measurable effect on anything, as though the space it entered had decided energy was no longer a concept it intended to honor. Coalition command adjusted. Increased power output. Narrowed beam diameter to concentrate force. Fifth attempt used a pulse weapon, a compressed burst designed to overwhelm any known organic resistance. Sixth was a focused thermal lance hot enough to melt rocket range. Seventh was a combination of both, fired in sequence. All 3 vanished the same way, into the zone. No return data. Mark watched every attempt from the observation deck. He offered no analysis. Nobody asked. Drones went next. 42 autonomous units, each one equipped with close-range sensors and real-time data relay. Coalition protocol for unresponsive energy weapons deploy. Physical reconnaissance. Confirm conditions on the ground. Adjust targeting based on direct observation. First 12 drones entered the contamination zone and transmitted for an average of 1.8 seconds each before going silent. Housings were intact when debris was recovered 2 hours later. Every sensor array inside had been overwritten. Data recorded during those 1.8 seconds was unreadable, corrupted in a pattern coalition analysts had never encountered before. Not random noise. Structured corruption, as though the instruments had been reprogrammed by something that understood how they worked and had no use for what they were designed to do. Drones 13 through 31 produced similar results. Some transmitted for up to 4 seconds before the feed cut. None returned usable intelligence. The black never attacked them directly. It made their instruments meaningless instead. Recovery teams pulled 3 units apart over the next hour. Internal components were undamaged. Power cells still held charge. Navigation systems were intact. But every sensor, optical, thermal, electromagnetic, spectrographic had been rewritten at the hardware level. Not erased. Overwritten with data that corresponded to no known encoding standard. Coalition analysts spent 40 minutes attempting to parse it. First Pass used standard decryption protocols designed for intercepted military communications, encrypted beacon signals, anything with a recognizable structure beneath obfuscation. The protocols returned clean. The overwritten data was not encrypted. It was open, unguarded, formatted for immediate reading by a system that could read it. Second Pass ran the raw signal against every known measurement framework in the Coalition database. Electromagnetic spectra, gravitational variance, temporal drift, biological cellular density. Each framework produced a partial match, not noise, not corruption. The readings aligned with real physical phenomena, but phenomena that no single instrument class was designed to capture simultaneously. The signal was recording multiple layers of reality at once. Third Pass attempted manual interpretation. 2 senior analysts worked the output for 12 minutes before the first one stopped and noted that the feed was not corrupted at all. It was complete. It was coherent. It corresponded to measurements no human instrument had ever been designed to take. Remaining 11 drones were recalled before they entered the zone. Mark left the observation deck at 0612 and walked to the communications suite. A coalition officer was reviewing drone recovery data at one of the station's rows of corrupted readouts, each one a flat line, where sensor information should have been. She glanced up when he entered, said nothing, and went back to the screen. Mark watched for 30 seconds. Then he walked out. There was nothing to fix, nothing to strike. Nothing that responded to force the way anything he had ever fought responded to force. Every tool the coalition had brought was designed to solve problems with bodies' limits edges. What was spreading across the surface below had none of those properties. It was not a thing to be destroyed. It was a condition to be managed, except the people trying to manage it had just spent 4 hours proving they could not. Cecil's message arrived at 0641. Short. One-line status. Mark stood at the viewport and looked at the planet. Infected stretches still expanding. Beams had ceased firing. Drones were being cataloged in the hangar. Around him, a 7-ship fleet had spent the better part of an hour, demonstrating that it had no capability to alter what was happening below. He typed back, "They can't reach it." Cecil's response came 4 minutes later. 2 words, "I know." Viltrumite signal registered on Coalition sensors at 0714. Deep space origin, well beyond the Sol system boundary, closing fast. Not a communication, not a probe. A power signature consistent with a strike-class vessel moving at speeds that made Coalition cruisers look stationary by comparison. Tactical officer flagged it immediately and forwarded to command. Coalition command responded in 11 seconds. Single directive broadcast, fleet-wide. The Empire has noticed. Anissa hit the atmosphere at Mach 47 and did not slow down. 12 Viltrumite soldiers behind her, each one locked into a descent vector that would put them on the ground in under 4 seconds. No parachutes. No heat shielding. No transition period between orbit and impact. They were not landing. They were arriving. The infected stretch below covered 40 kilometers of former coastline. From orbit, it registered as a dark band across the surface, unbroken, deliberate spreading in the same patterned lines that had become familiar to anyone watching Sol from the outside. From the ground, it registered as almost nothing. Air that sat wrong. Ground that held weight differently. Silence where silence had no reason to be. Anissa broke the surface at 0312 and struck the first cluster of symbiote mass before her boots touched Earth. Viltrumite fist met symbiote body, and the result was not a contest. Anissa's strike carried enough force to flatten a reinforced structure and the mass. A dense knot of black organic material, roughly the size of a transport vehicle, came apart in 3 pieces. Each piece hit the ground and stopped moving within a second. Inert, destroyed. She was already moving to the next target before the debris settled. Behind her, the strike team spread across the infected stretch in a coordinated arc. 12 soldiers. 12 lanes of destruction cutting outward from the insertion point, radiating in clean geometry. Each Viltrumite fought the same way, fast, brutal, no hesitation. They had done this before, not against symbiotes, but against every other form of resistant biology in 17 conquered systems. The mechanics were identical. Find the mass. Break it apart. Move forward. For the first 9 minutes it worked. Anissa tore through 4 clusters in rapid succession. Each one shattered on contact. No resistance worth noting. The symbiote mass was dense and alien, but it was still organic tissue at its core, and organic tissue had a breaking point. Viltrumites had spent millennia locating breaking points in every species they had ever encountered. Craig, operating 2 kilometers south, was having the same experience. His count was at 11 clusters when the first host appeared. It emerged from the black at the edge of a collapsed residential area, a human body male covered in the dark layer that marked bonded hosts. It moved fast, faster than anything human should have managed. Craig closed the distance in a single stride and drove his fist into its chest. The host flew backward. 40 meters. Hit a wall, went through it, and landed in the street beyond. Craig followed, closed the gap, and struck again. Ribs gave. Spine cracked. It should have been over. The host stood up. Craig paused. 1 second. 2. The dark layer on the host's body rippled once, then sealed the damage underneath, not healing, not repairing. Something else entirely. The body was being rebuilt from a template that bore no relation to the original design. Bones reformed in configurations that were subtly wrong. The host turned to face Craig and waited. Patient, still, ready for the next exchange. Craig hit it again. Full force, the kind of strike that had put holes in armored hulls across a dozen campaigns. The host crumpled, cratered the street on impact, and lay motionless for 3 seconds. Then the dark layer moved, sealing, adjusting, rebuilding. Craig changed approach on the third exchange. Force was not the variable. He closed to close range, drove his fist into the chest cavity, and aimed for the organic core beneath the coating. His fist found it felt the density of unmodified tissue beneath the black, and crushed inward. The body folded, went down, stayed down for 2 seconds. The coating moved. Faster this time. It flowed over the crushed section, pulled the tissue back into shape, and sealed the surface in a single motion. The body stood up again, upright, oriented, facing him. No visible damage remained. He stepped back 1 pace. Not retreat, assessment. He reported the anomaly to Anissa on a tight band frequency. Voice flat. Viltrumites did not sound surprised. They sounded precise. Host is non-compliant. Physical damage not producing permanent results. Requesting protocol adjustment. Anissa received the report while she was mid-strike against a larger cluster. A mass the size of a small building pulsing with slow rhythm. She hit it hard enough to split it in 2. Both halves kept moving. She hit them again. They kept moving. She grabbed one section with both hands and tore it apart at the seam, working through layers of black material until she reached the organic core underneath and crushed it between her palms. That one stayed dead. She filed the information and kept moving. Some targets broke permanently. Others rebuilt. The difference was what the dark layer underneath was doing, with the damage adapting in real time, faster than anything in the Empire's combat database. Anissa had fought resistant biology before. Resistant biology pushed back. This was not pushing back. This was absorbing input and returning a corrected version of itself. Mark was watching from 3 kilometers out. Cecil had positioned him at the perimeter, close enough to see the engagement, far enough to stay clear of it. Mark had not argued. He was not equipped for this fight, and he understood that clearly. The Viltrumites were operating at a level of output that made every combat Mark had run in the last 4 days feel like a controlled exercise. They should have been winning. By every metric Mark could read: speed, force, output, coordination, aggression. The Viltrumites were dominating. 12 soldiers had cut through more infected territory in 20 minutes than GDA had managed in a week. The swarm was being destroyed faster than it could reorganize. The ground was being cleared in clean, efficient passes. And yet, Mark watched the clusters that reformed after being torn apart. Watched the hosts that stood again after being driven into the earth hard enough to crack streets. Watch the Viltrumites adjust, adapt, hit harder, and watch the black layer adjust right back each time marginally faster than the last. It was not winning. It was not losing. It was recording. At 0347, Anissa called the withdrawal. No alarm, no urgency. A clean tactical decision. The engagement had produced sufficient data. Continuing would not alter the outcome. 12 soldiers extracted in under 90 seconds, ascending through the atmosphere in the same tight formation they had arrived in. Fast, organized, leaving the infected stretch behind them unchanged. Every soldier in the formation carried a film of black residue on exposed skin, forearms, hands, the neck where suit seals met flesh. Thin, oily. It did not wipe clean, not unchanged. Anissa looked back once before breaking the atmosphere. The territory they had cleared 40 minutes of Viltrumite strike force applied at full capacity had already begun to fill again. New mass pooling in the craters, hosts reassembling in the rubble. The stretch had not shrunk. It had absorbed the damage and adjusted its shape around it the way water settles after being disturbed. She activated the long-range transmission and spoke into it once. "This is not resistance. This is incompatibility." The signal carried outward past the atmosphere, past the quarantine perimeter, past the coalition fleet that had already proven itself irrelevant. It carried toward a single destination. The response, when it came, would not originate from this planet. I honestly thought Anissa and her team would just punch their way out of this. But it is such a brutal reality seeing a Viltrumite realize they cannot win. The way the black stuff just rebuilds itself after being crushed is insane. And honestly, it is not even fighting back. It is just barely existing and learning from every hit. It is like trying to punch a shadow. This makes you wonder if the strongest warriors in the universe are incompatible. Then what hope does Mark have? Are the Viltrumites actually scared for once? Let us find out what Cecil's crazy backup plan is. Infected stretches had stopped expanding. Cecil noticed it first, not from the tactical board, but from the pattern of sensor reports. For 6 days, every 12-hour cycle had shown growth. New territory absorbed new boundaries drawn. The rate had been consistent, predictable. Then at 0200 hours on day 7, the report stopped showing expansion. The black was still there. Every meter it had claimed remained claimed. But the edge had gone still. He spent 3 hours confirming the data before he called Mark. Mark had come back to the surface 2 days after the Viltrumite operation. Not because anyone ordered it, but because staying in orbit had begun to feel purposeless. Watching from above was useful for intelligence, useless for understanding. He had been walking the perimeter of the dead stretches since dawn, not fighting, not clearing, just looking at the shape of what was happening rather than the force of it. The black had changed, no longer spreading outward, deepening instead. The territory had held 40 kilometers of coastline, 6 inland sectors. 3 urban centers had gone quieter over the past 48 hours. Fewer hosts at the edges, less symbiote activity at the boundary lines. Pools across open terrain were thicker than before, denser, heavier. They sat in place and ceased reaching for new surfaces. The whole system had the quality of an organism settling into position. Finished arriving, now simply occupying. Mark stood at the edge of one of the inland sectors and watched a pool of black material cover what had been a parking structure. It filled every crack in the concrete. It coated every vehicle in the lot, motionless, inert, present. Cecil's comm signal came flat and precise. "It's consolidating, not retreating." Consolidating. Mark understood the distinction without Cecil explaining it. Retreat meant weakness. Consolidation meant the opposite. "Why now?" Mark asked. Cecil paused before answering. When he spoke, the words carried weight, the weight of a conclusion reached before the conversation began. "Because it has what it needs." Cecil had been running containment scenarios for 18 hours by the time he brought the plan to Mark. The math was brutal, and Cecil presented it without softening. Every approach that involved force-direct combat, orbital bombardment, biological countermeasures had been tested and had failed. The coalition had demonstrated that energy weapons could not reach the contamination. The Viltrumites had demonstrated that physical force could destroy individual units, but could not reduce the territory held. GDA had demonstrated repeatedly that conventional military operations produced no lasting change. Only one variable remained untested: geometry. Angstrom-Levy's portals operated outside normal spatial logic. They created discontinuities in space rather than traversing it. Points where one location ceased to exist in relation to another. Cecil had spent 2 days reviewing every data set GDA had collected on Angstrom's abilities, and the conclusion was uncomfortable. But clear portals were the only mechanism available that could interact with the Black on its own terms. Not by destroying it, by relocating it. Cutting the infected territory out of Earth's geography entirely, and placing it somewhere the contamination could not spread back from. The problem was scale. Angstrom's portals were unstable. Each one operated at the edge of spatial coherence, and the larger the area being relocated, the higher the probability of catastrophic failure. Cecil's analysts had modeled 17 scenarios. In 14 of them, the portal collapse destroyed the territory being moved. In 3 of them, it destroyed the surrounding area as well, meaning a significant portion of Earth's surface would be lost alongside the contamination. Cecil presented all 17 scenarios to Mark in a single briefing. He laid the data out and waited. No recommendation, no editorializing. Mark listened without interrupting. When Cecil finished, he sat in silence for a long time. "You're asking me to help you destroy part of the planet," Mark said. Cecil's response was immediate. "I'm asking you to choose between losing a portion of the surface and losing everything on it. The contamination is not going to stop on its own. It is consolidated, which means it is stable, which means it will remain stable indefinitely unless we disrupt it. There is no version of this where Earth comes out clean." Mark looked at the tactical display, the infected stretches rendered in dark lines across the map, still and dense, occupying territory that would never be recovered. Cecil was right. He had been right for days. The war was already over. It had ended the moment the Black stopped expanding and started settling. "Winning was never on the table," Cecil said. "Surviving was." Angstrom was brought in at 1400 hours. He was not in good condition. The duplicates had been failing for days, not because of the contamination, but because Angstrom himself was deteriorating. Each portal he opened pulled on the same biological core, and he had opened too many, too fast in the first days of the crisis. His hands shook. His eyes moved too quickly. He spoke in short bursts and stopped mid-sentence twice before Cecil cut him off and laid out what was needed. Angstrom listened. He understood the spatial mechanics faster than anyone else in the room, faster than Cecil's analysts, faster than the coalition engineers. He understood the risk as well. "The portal has to be big enough to contain the entire infected area," Angstrom said. "That is not a portal. That is a surgery on the planet. If I open that and it destabilizes, the collapse radius covers everything within 200 kilometers of the insertion point." "Can you do it?" Cecil asked. Angstrom looked at his hands. They trembled. He closed them into fists and held them still for 3 heartbeats before answering. "I can open it. I cannot guarantee what happens when it closes." Cecil accepted this and began planning logistics. Mark volunteered for the anchor point at 1730 hours. The plan required a focal point, a biological signature strong enough to draw the Black's attention inward, away from the portal's edge, long enough for the containment to seal. Cecil's analysts had run the models. Viltrumite biology was too alien for the Black to prioritize. Human biology was too common. The contamination had already absorbed enough human templates to treat them as baseline. What was needed was a signature the Black had already begun to recognize, but had not yet fully cataloged. Mark fit that profile. He was half Viltrumite, He carried a biological signature that existed nowhere else in the data the Black had collected. He was in the language Cecil's analysts used an incomplete template. A piece of information the system would want to finish reading. Cecil laid out the role without editorializing. Mark would position himself at the center of the infected territory. He would remain there while the portal opened. The Black would orient toward him, not aggressively, but attentionally. The way a system orients toward data it is not yet fully processed. That orientation would pull the contamination inward, away from the portal's perimeter long enough for Angstrom to seal the extraction. Mark would be inside the sealed area when it closed. Cecil did not state this explicitly. The models showed it clearly. Mark read it on the display and understood what it meant. "I know," Mark said before Cecil could continue. He did not say he would survive it. He did not say he was confident it would work. He stood up, looked at the map one final time, the dark lines across the surface. The territory that had swallowed everything thrown at it, and walked out of the briefing room. Mark entered the infected stretch at 2100 hours. No weapons, no suit, no support team. Cecil had argued against this, had insisted on at least a comms relay, a tracking beacon, and Mark refused. Anything technological that entered the Black became meaningless. Cecil had seen the drone data. He accepted it the same way he accepted everything else, at this point not willingly, but because there was no alternative. The Black registered his presence the moment he crossed the boundary. Not violently, not quickly. It simply adjusted pools of dark material on the terrain, shifted inward slightly, drawing toward him. Hosts at the edges of the territory turned to face him. Patient. Still. Waiting. Mark walked deeper. The air changed thicker, heavier, carrying a quality that was not quite sound, and not quite pressure, but existed between the two. The surface beneath his feet was covered in black, and it yielded slightly under his weight as though accommodating something it had been expecting. He walked until he reached the center of the largest infected sector. He stopped. He stood there, and the black settled around him, dense, still present. And for a long time, neither of them moved. Chapter 8. Mark had been standing at the center of the occupied stretch for 9 hours when the cut opened. He felt it before Azure any instrument registered it. A change in pressure, a single pulse that traveled outward from the perimeter and dissipated into the air around him. The void settled differently after that pulse. Not violently, not with urgency. It adjusted the way a system adjusts when a new variable enters the equation, registering, processing, deciding what the input meant. Cecil's voice came through on a frequency he had not known was holding. Thin, scratched, barely audible. 2 words. Then silence. Angstrom had opened it at 600 hours. Not a portal. The opening was a discontinuity, a line where the surface ceased to connect to the rest of Earth's geography and became another place entirely. The edge of it ran in a clean arc around the perimeter of the largest occupied mass. Inside the arc, Mark. The void. Everything the contamination had claimed in this sector. Outside the arc, the rest of the planet. The coastline that had connected the stretch to the mainland read as absent on every sensor GDA had left running. Not destroyed. Disconnected. A section of the map lifted out and held in place by no mechanism any instrument could identify. The void responded to the cut the way it responded to everything. Without aggression, but with attention. It oriented inward. The shift built gradually, a tightening of the air, a change in the way sound carried across the stretch, not silence. The opposite. A density of presence that made every other input feel thin by comparison. Sensors at the perimeter registered the change as a power event, not energy output, but a change in the baseline of what energy meant within the area. Readings that had been stable for days spiked once held at a level no instrument had a scale for. And then the instrument stopped returning data. Not from damage. The readings had become irrelevant. The space they were designed to measure had become a space where measurement did not apply. This world is thin. The words did not come from a direction. They did not arrive as sound. They registered on the tactical displays at GDA command as a burst of structured signal, 3 words transmitted on a frequency that had not existed 30 seconds prior, received by equipment that had no receiver capable of processing it. Cecil's analyst flagged it. He read it. The meaning required no interpretation. It was a statement of fact delivered by the only entity in the situation with enough information to make one. Not a threat. Not a declaration. A reading. The way a technician assesses the density of a material before deciding what tool to use next. Mark felt the words arrive, as vibration, a single pulse through the ground beneath his feet, traveling outward from the center of the stretch and dissipating into the edges of the cut. Then the void settled. Dense. Present. Finished with whatever assessment it had been running. He felt the shift after that. The pools of dark material on the terrain drew closer, not rushing, not converging, but pooling, toward the center, toward him. The hosts at the edges of the stretch turned inward. The entire system contracted by degrees, pulling its mass away from the perimeter of the cut and toward the one point inside it that had not yet been fully catalogued. He stood where he was, unmoving. The coalition fleet, holding position at 400 kilometers altitude, read the power signature at 0601 hours. The sensor officer's report was 3 sentences. The commander read it, set it down, and ordered a withdrawal to 600 kilometers within 90 seconds. No debate. The signature matched nothing in any database the fleet carried. No weapon signature. No energy output. A change in the nature of the space itself and the fleet had no protocol for that. The cut held for 42 seconds after the withdrawal before the geometry began to fracture. It did not collapse. It warped. The edges of the discontinuity started pulling adjacent space inward, not just the occupied stretch, but the terrain surrounding it, the water, the atmosphere above it. The arc that Angstrom had opened began to widen. Not by design. The spatial mechanics behind the cut were destabilizing, and as they destabilized, they consumed more volume to compensate. The collapse radius expanded by 2 kilometers in the first 30 seconds. Then, 4 kilometers in the next 15. Cecil saw it on the tactical display at the same time Angstrom did. The numbers were unambiguous. If the cut continued to destabilize at the current rate, everything within 80 kilometers of the insertion point would be pulled into the discontinuity when it sealed. That included 3 coastal cities. Combined population, 412,000. He did not ask how long it would take to stabilize. He already had the answer. It would not stabilize. Angstrom's openings never did at this scale. They held as long as he held them open, and they consumed more with every second they stayed. Angstrom was on the remote channel speaking in fragments. The equipment keeping him functional had begun to fail. The words came in bursts, each one carrying more effort than the last. He was asking him to let the cut collapse, to pull back, to accept the contamination in place rather than risk pulling half a coastline into the void alongside it. He listened. He let Angstrom finish. If we waited for a clean answer, there wouldn't be anyone left to ask it. Angstrom did not respond for 4 seconds. When he did, it was a single word, acknowledged. The seal sequence began at 6:47 hours. Angstrom closed the cut from the outside, pulling the edges of the discontinuity inward, collapsing the opening back toward its center. The geometry compressed. Space folded along the arc, and everything inside the arc went with it. The void. The contamination. The hosts. The terrain they occupied. all of it drawn inward along the line Angstrom had carved and was now erasing. Mark was inside when the edges reached him. What he experienced was not pain. It was not force or pressure or heat. It was absence, a total removal of every input his senses had been receiving. No air, no ground, no light, no sound, no gravity. For a duration, he could not measure there was no input at all. Not darkness. Darkness requires a surface to exist against. This was the removal of the surface itself. Then there was ground again. He was at the edge of a crater. Not a crater made by impact, made by removal. The coastline ended where the occupied stretch had been, and beyond that edge, there was no coastline. A gap in the geography of earth and water had rushed in to fill it. The water sat wrong, flat, unmoving. The surface held as though it had forgotten what motion was supposed to feel like. Mark sat down at the edge. He did not stand up for a long time. From orbit, the Coalition fleet registered the event as a gravitational anomaly lasting 2.8 seconds. The sensor data was inconclusive. The quarantine remained in place. The representative who had spoken to him 2 days prior composed a report for her command that described the incident in clinical language, a localized spatial collapse of unknown origin. No threat escalation detected, monitoring to continue. The report named neither Mark nor Knull. It described the event as an anomaly and recommended continued observation. The remaining contaminated stretches across Earth did not vanish when the seal closed. They stabilized. Every occupied mass across every continent went quiet. At the same moment, the cut sealed, not retreating, not dying, simply ceasing to expand. The territory each one held remained held. The hosts within those zones remained in place, motionless, silent, dormant, present, rooted in the ground they had claimed, with no indication they would ever release it. Earth was alive. 31 contaminated stretches sat across 6 continents, each one a permanent boundary on every map that would be drawn from this point forward. No one went in. No one could measure what remained inside them. The instruments that entered those zones returned data that corresponded to no known encoding standard, the same structured corruption the Coalition drones had recorded weeks earlier. The same signal that meant a presence was recording, transmitting, persisting in ways human technology was not designed to interpret. Cecil filed his final report at 0800 hours. It was 3 pages long. The words victory and defeat appeared nowhere in it. It used the word containment 11 times. He read it once, sealed the file, and did not open it again. Mark did not speak for 6 hours after extraction. The medical team noted the silence. They noted the absence of physical trauma. No wounds, no broken bones, no damage that explained why he could not seem to move without effort. They noted that his hands would not stop shaking. No explanation came. 3 weeks later, a GDA technician running routine maintenance on a deep ocean monitoring array noticed that a section of water 200 kilometers south of the seal site did not reflect light the way water was supposed to. She flagged it. The report went to Cecil's desk. He set it aside without forwarding it to anyone. The array continued to record. The background noise it picked up, low-structured continuous, matched nothing in any database GDA had access to. Not random, not signal degradation, coherent, patient, aimed at a receiver no instrument on Earth had ever been built to detect. It had been transmitting since the seal closed. It had not stopped.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.